You're sitting at a kitchen table with a retirement statement in your hand, and the number on it says $44,000. You read it twice. Then you pick up your phone, and the first headline on the screen says, "The average American retirement account just hit an all-time record of $167,000. Same country, same year, same economy. So you do the only thing a reasonable person can do with that. You assume you're behind. You assume you missed a meeting in your 20s nobody invited you to, and you fold the statement in half and put it in the drawer with the other paper you've quietly decided not to be brave about. That man is Desmond Ruiz, 41, installs heating and air conditioning in Dayton, Ohio, the most statistically normal man in America. Spoiler, he isn't behind. Both numbers are true, nobody lied, and the space between them is the most expensive piece of misinformation in your financial life. My name is Nick, and today we're going to find the man hiding inside that gap. Because there is one. He's real, he's alive, he has a very nice garage, and he has no idea he's ruining your life. And once you've met him, you'll understand why every shocking statistic about the average American is shocking for entirely the wrong reason. Here's the trick. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When somebody says the average American, they almost always mean the mean. They add everybody up, divide by the number of people, print the number, and that number is garbage. Because if you put 9 guys who make $50,000 a year in a room with one guy who makes $10 million, the average income in that room is just under $1.5 million. Congratulations, everybody in the room is now a millionaire. 9 of them are still wondering how to pay for the transmission. Now watch what happens when the 10th guy leaves. The average income in that room collapses by about $1.5 million, and not one person's life has changed in any way at all. The median is different. The median is the guy standing in the exact middle of the line. Half the country ahead of him, half the country behind him. And he genuinely does not care what the guy at the front is holding. Nobody writes headlines about the median. The median doesn't test well. The median is a person. The mean is a rumor. So Desmond's $44,000 is the median retirement balance, according to Vanguard's data on millions of real accounts. The 167,000 in the headline is the mean. Same data set, same day. That gap is not a rounding error. That gap is a portrait of who owns what. And before we go further, a promise. There is one number in this video, worse than all the others. It's the one I think about when I can't sleep. I'm holding it until the end because you need everything else first for it to land. Just know it's coming. Let's start with the statistic that should end the conversation on its own. The Federal Reserve asks Americans a beautifully simple question every year. If a $400 emergency landed on you tomorrow, could you cover it in cash? Not a card. Not a loan from your brother, not the $20 in the coat you haven't worn since March. Cash. Roughly 37% say no, $400. That is not a medical crisis. That's a set of brake pads, that's a water heater making a noise you've generously decided to interpret as a personality quirk. And nearly 4 in 10 adults in the richest country in human history can't absorb it without borrowing. Worse, it hasn't improved. That number was better in 2021 when the government was literally mailing people checks than it is today after 3 straight years of headlines about how red hot the economy is. So what actually happens when the $400 lands? It goes on the card, and the card is where the real damage gets done, and almost nobody does this math out loud. The average interest rate on cards actually carrying a balance is now hovering around 22%. On a new general purpose card, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau clocked it north of 25. And the minimum payment, that friendly little number at the bottom of the statement, is usually about 2% of the balance. Put those next to each other and something ugly happens. On a $2,000 balance at 22%, the minimum payment is $40. About 36 of that is interest. $4 touches the actual debt. You're paying $40 a month to move the needle for. That's not a payment plan, that's a subscription to your own past. Which is how Americans ended up paying $160 billion in credit card interest in a single year, not principal interest. That is the convenience fee we collectively pay for not having $400. Now, cars, because if the credit card is the wound, the car is the weapon. The average payment on a new car in America is now roughly $770 a month, used about $530, and nearly 19% of new car buyers, about 1 in 5, are signing up for payments over $1,000 a month. $1,000 every month for the privilege of sitting in traffic in a slightly nicer chair. But it's the 770 I want to sit with because I don't think most people have ever actually run it. $770 a month invested instead at an 8% annual return over 40 years compounds to roughly $2.4 million. Let me say that again. The average American car payment is a $2.4 million decision, which means the average American isn't too poor to become a millionaire. The average American is financing a depreciating asset instead of buying an appreciating one on a 60, 72, sometimes 84-month schedule. 84 months. That's a loan term that used to be reserved for buying a house. And subprime auto delinquencies are now the highest ever recorded. And look, most people need the car. The car is how you get to the job that pays for the car. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's a toll booth with a steering wheel. Now, here's where it stops being about spending habits entirely. Roughly 29% of people using buy now, pay later services have used them to finance groceries. Groceries. Nearly half of all users have paid late in the past year, and more than half say outright that they could not make ends meet without it. Which brings me to Renata. She's 29, she's a dental hygienist, she makes about $58,000 a year, and she splits her grocery bill into 4 payments. Not because she's frivolous, because payday is Friday and her kid needs to eat on Tuesday, and Tuesday has never once been willing to negotiate. Renata does something every Sunday night that I think about a lot. She opens the banking app, then the credit card app, then the buy now, pay later app, then the app for the second buy now, pay later service she signed up for when the first one hit its limit, and she does arithmetic across 4 screens to work out what day of the week she's allowed to buy chicken. She has never called this budgeting. She'd be embarrassed to. She calls it checking. Renata is not a cautionary tale. Renata is a solvency bridge with a phone app, and there are millions of her, which is the thing I want you carrying for the rest of this video. Every statistic coming up sounds like a story about individual failure. It isn't. It's a story about arithmetic that stopped working and about an entire industry that showed up very helpfully to sell people financing for the gap. Total American household debt just crossed $18.8 trillion, and the shape of that number matters more than the size because it's not a pile of yachts. It's $13 trillion in houses people needed somewhere to live in, $1.5 trillion in cars they needed to get to work in, another $1.5 trillion in degrees they were told they had to have, and a little over $1 trillion in credit cards that mostly bought groceries, brake pads, and water heaters. That's not a spending spree. That's a country putting its own survival on layaway. And the student loan piece just quietly fell off a cliff. When the pandemic era pause on reporting delinquencies ended, the share of balances 90 days past due went from under 1% to over 10%. That's not a decline. That's a trapdoor. All right, that's the debt. Now, let's go look at what's supposed to be sitting on the other side of the ledger. Back to Desmond and his $44,000 because there's a second half to that statement and it's worse. The standard rule says you can safely pull about 4% of your retirement savings each year without running out. 4% of $44,115 is $1,765 a year, which is $147 a month. The median American's retirement plan pays out $147 a month. And even if we're generous and look only at people already 65 and up, the median gets you about $318 a month. Meanwhile, retirees themselves say you need north of $800,000 to retire comfortably. So it isn't that most Americans have a small retirement, it's that most Americans do not have a retirement plan. They have Social Security plus a tip. And I don't say that as a punchline. About 78% of retirees rely on Social Security, and among those who earned under $50,000 a year, it's closer to 85%. 1 in 5 adults over 50 has nothing saved at all, nothing, zero. Which brings us to the most load-bearing number in the system, and the one nobody wants to say into a microphone. The latest trustees report projects the Social Security Retirement Trust Fund runs dry around late 2032. After that, payroll taxes cover only about 77% of promised benefits, which is a very polite, very actuarial way of saying a 23% automatic haircut applied to the income source that 4 out of 5 retirees are currently standing on. Congress can fix that. Congress has fixed it before, but you probably want to know the beam is cracked before somebody tells you the house is fine, and you can watch people improvising around it in real time. 6% of workers took a hardship withdrawal from their 401k last year, up from 2% 4 years ago, climbing every single year, and workers earning under 100,000 were 3.5 times more likely to do it. Sit with that. The retirement account has become the emergency fund because the emergency fund doesn't exist. We're eating the seed corn in a country that won't stop telling us about the record harvest. Now let's talk about what this actually feels like, because a statistic is just a feeling that somebody put in a spreadsheet. It feels like standing in the cereal aisle doing math you already did in the car. It feels like the full body drop when the check engine light comes on. And the 2 seconds afterward, where you calculate whether you can get away with pretending not to have seen it. It feels like telling your kid the field trip probably isn't going to work out this time in a light, casual voice, and then being furious at yourself for how good you've gotten at that voice. It feels like being awake at 2 a.m, running numbers you've run 40 times, as if the 40th time is when they'll come out differently. And it feels more than anything like being the only one. That's the part the statistics get wrong by existing, because 37% is not a number when you're standing in the cereal aisle. When you're standing in the cereal aisle, 37% is just you. Okay, housing, quickly, because, you already know. Median home price about $427,000, median household income about $83,700, price to income ratio of roughly 5 to 1. In 1990 it was 3.2, in 1970 2.2, and the house did not get 3 times better. It's the same beige carpet. Nobody added a wing. Half of all renters in America, a record 22.6 million households, now spend more than 30% of their income on rent, and 12 million of them spend more than half. Realtors report the median first-time homebuyer is now 40 years old. That number is contested, honestly. Mortgage records put it closer to 33, and I'd rather tell you that than pretend I didn't see it. But nobody disputes the direction. In the 80s, it was 29. Either way, we've bolted most of a decade onto the runway now. You're probably thinking, well, Nick, this is all very grim, but maybe things are actually getting better and you're just cherry picking the worst numbers you could find. Good. You should think that. And here's the thing. You're partly right, so let me give you the strongest version of your own argument. 401k participation just hit a record 86%. 2 decades ago, it was 65%. Poverty fell to about 10.5%, near the lowest ever recorded, down from 22% in 1959. And between 2019 and 2023, real wages for the lowest paid 10% of American workers grew faster than for anyone above them, clawing back a real chunk of 40 years of widening inequality. Those are true. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but look very closely at that first one because it is the whole ball game. Why did 401k participation jump to 86%? A national outbreak of financial discipline? Did everyone read the same book? No. 61% of plans now enroll you automatically, and in the plans that enroll you automatically, participation runs about 94%. In the plans where you have to opt in yourself, it's about 64%. Same humans, same wages, same willpower. 30-point difference. The most successful piece of retirement policy in modern American history worked by changing a checkbox, not by changing a person. Nobody got smarter. Somebody just moved the default, which proves the thing I most want you to walk away with. The fragility is not human nature, it's a setting, and somebody chose it. And it runs the other way too. The average American spends about $219 a month on subscriptions and believes they spend $86. That's not a character flaw. That's a business model built on the mathematical certainty that you will not check. Americans spent $104.7 billion on lottery tickets in a single year, in a country where 37% can't find $400 in an emergency. And the House doesn't just win. The House funds the school system with money taken from people who can't afford brake pads, and then the school doesn't teach financial literacy. So let me finally introduce you to the man in the gap. His name is Gerald, 63, orthodontist outside Scottsdale, $2.1 million in his retirement accounts. He got there by earning well for 30 years and doing nothing clever with it, which is generally how it's done. Gerald is not the villain here. He's never met Desmond, and never will. He's a decent man who is very good at teeth, but Gerald is the reason the headline said 167,000. Gerald and a few million people like him are what turns Desmond's 44,000 into a number that makes Desmond feel like he failed. Yeah, Gerald isn't hiding anything. He was just quietly averaged in, and Desmond was quietly measured against the result. And that's the con, though nobody committed fraud. The system just built a ruler out of everybody, handed it to the guy in the middle, and let him conclude he was short. If you're sitting there right now feeling that specific quiet shame, the kind that makes a person fold up a piece of paper and put it in a drawer, hear me. You were told to compare yourself to an average engineered to include the top 10%, who hold about 67% of all the wealth in this country. You were told retirement was your personal responsibility, then handed a system where 6% of your coworkers are rating it to keep the lights on. You were told to budget better by an industry that makes $160 billion a year on the fact that you can't. You are not behind. You were measured with a ruler that was built crooked on purpose. This is exactly what we dig into inside our school community, where I run the real numbers instead of the headline versions of them. Links in the description if you want in. Now, I promised you one number worse than all the others. Here it is. The median American household net worth is about $192,900. The mean is $1,063,700. There's Gerald again, 5.5 times over, but take the house out. Strip out home equity because you cannot eat your kitchen, and the median American household's net worth collapses to somewhere around $57,900. That's it. That's the whole cushion. Outside the walls, you sleep inside and still owe the bank for. The middle of this country has about $58,000, and that has to cover retirement, emergencies, a layoff, a bad diagnosis, and 30 years of being old. That's the number. That's the one I think about. So what do you actually do with it? You stop using the mean. That one's free. Every time you hear the word average attached to money, ask whose, and watch how often the answer is a man in Scottsdale you will never meet. You are not competing with him. You never were. Then you change one default instead of making 20 heroic decisions, because that is exactly what the 86% taught us. Automate the transfer on payday so the money leaves before you become a person with opinions about it. Raise the contribution 1% one time, then forget you did it and take the $770 seriously, because that number is genuinely yours. Most people need a car. Nobody needs that car. And the difference between the two compounded across a working life is a 7-figure number no Congress and no trust fund gets to touch. I want to leave you back at the kitchen table. Desmond took the statement out of the drawer. He didn't fix his life. Nobody fixes their life. He logged into the portal, moved his contribution from 4% to 5%, which cost him about $32.19 a paycheck, and set the increase to repeat automatically every January so he would never have to be brave about it twice. Renata is still splitting her groceries into 4 payments because $58,000 is still $58,000, and no YouTube video has ever moved a payday. But last Sunday, she only opened 3 apps instead of 4 because she called the card company and asked out loud for the first time in her life what her actual interest rate was. 26.9%. Nobody had ever told her. She'd never asked because she assumed the number was a verdict on her rather than a price on a product. And Gerald is fine. Gerald was always going to be fine. He's out there right now being averaged in with absolutely no idea that a man in Dayton spent 8 years thinking he was a failure because of him. That's the shocking statistic. Not that the average American is broke. The average American doesn't exist. It's that the real one, the one standing dead center in the line, has spent his entire working life comparing himself to a ghost and quietly concluding he was the one who came up short. You didn't come up short. You were handed the wrong number. Go get the right one.